We have come out with a new collection of Colourful Soul Pop-Outs designed to be used with seed beads and macrame techniques. For this technique, I'm going to be demonstrating how to string seed beads within this frame. I'll be using Beadsmith Fireline along with a flexible beading needle and a variety of Delica 11.0 size seed beads. To get started, I've strung my beading thread onto this flexible beading needle. I'm going to take the frame and find the center of the holes. Now this has 10 rows, so I want to start with the 5th hole down. I've pre-cut about 2 yards of the beading thread and pull it through till it's about halfway through the piece so that I have even ends. And now I'm ready to start my first row. So since the seed beads vary in size quite a bit, I always measure up each row when I do a piece by stringing a series of beads and then placing it in front of the frame to make sure it's going to fit. Because from bead to bead, the size can vary a decent amount, especially when you have a lot of them strung together. So then I'm going to make sure that I have the 5th hole down, and then we're going to go through the front of the hole here. And then I'm just going to pull the excess thread through. So I've got the start to our first row. I'm going to come up through the center of this with my thread, and then I'm going to come back through the beads. I like to keep tension on this side as I'm pulling through. It just keeps the bead straighter and easier to string. Go ahead and pull that thread all the way through to get it nice and tight. And now we have the beginning to your first row. So I'm going to work my way up from here, starting with this next row. And I'd like to create somewhat of an ombre effect. So I'm going to start with a green that is somewhat similar to this one. So I'm going to begin stringing my next row of beads. Kind of a rule of thumb when you're working with a circle is it's usually about 1 bead less than the row before, but again, that can vary. So I always measure it up before I string the next row through. And that looks pretty good, as we can see here. So I'm going to go through to the opposite side through the front. This row here is going directly from this bead where we strung it through and across through this row. And it has not entered this side yet. So at this point, we're going to come back up the back to the front, and then we're going to string straight across through the beads. And now, before we move on to the next row, we're going to come through this next hole here, down through the front, up through the center, and then back across through this row. Now we're ready to string the next row. So I'm going to start my next color, string these on, just be following the same pattern for the rest of the rows. Down through the front, up through the center, across through the row, down through the front, up through the center, and across. You can kind of see how these are going to pattern out. Okay, so I'm ready to start on the bottom section of the pendant. So as you can see, we still have this loose end hanging here. So I'm going to come up through the center, pull all the beading thread through, and I'm going to come across through this row of beads. Pull the beading thread through, nice and taut. I'm ready to go down to the next row. I'm going to repeat the same pattern on the lower half. So I'm going to start again with the same green color that we started with. And I'm ready to start this next row. just repeating the same steps all the way down to the end. I'm just finishing up this last row. So at this point, we've got all of our beads strung, and I'm going to come through and do a stabilizing stitch. I'm going to come down through this next row again until we've ended up with our two tails next to each other that we're going to tie together, and then we'll tuck back through the beads. So I have the one end, one of my tails tucked through. I'm going to take this thread trimmer and trim it super close. Then I'm going to string my beading needle onto the other tail, and I'm going to string this through the next row of beads. Get that nice and tight. The thread trimmer, trim that nice and close, and then we have our finished beaded component. This can be made into a pendant or a bracelet connector or an earring connector. There's just lots of possibilities. As you can see, the thread does a really nice job hiding in the grooves. This can be also stained or painted with Colourful Soul paints to really bring out and coordinate with the colors that you have chosen.